Canada headed Donald Trump's tariff off at the pass this week by focusing on fentanyl because the U.S. president keeps insisting that massive amounts of the drug are coming from our country, even though the facts don't support that. According to the most recent U.S. government data, the vast majority of fentanyl seizures are made at the southern border with Mexico. 0.2% of all fentanyl border seizures were made at the northern border. Even so, on top of already beefing up the Canada-U.S. crossing, Justin Trudeau is now promising to list Mexican drug cartels as terrorist groups, committing hundreds of millions more to combating organized crime, and is even creating what he's calling a fentanyl czar. Alberta's premier happy to hear it.
And I think that if we can avoid irritating them by saying we're not as bad as Mexico, that's not flying. So we should stop saying that. We should say we hear you. We have a problem too. It's in both of our interests to solve it.
Alberta does have a fentanyl problem. This province has seen thousands of people die from the drug over the last decade. But the problem isn't just the use of fentanyl, it's also the manufacturing of it. Last week, a 37-year-old man was sentenced to 16 years in prison in connection with this, a highly sophisticated fentanyl super lab busted near Okotoks in 2021. It's the largest of its kind in Alberta history, one of the largest ever in Canada. Estimated street value, $300 million. And last fall, police discovered another super lab near Grand Prairie. So who is behind these labs? Are Mexican cartels involved? And is the fentanyl found in our province also bound for the U.S. market? To talk about that, I reached out to the head of the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams. It's Alert that makes these big busts. So obviously the people behind this super lab in southern Alberta, they were organized and they were criminals. But is this an organized crime case in the sense of what we think of when we talk about organized crime, at least in popular culture, gangs involved, cartels involved? Can you elaborate?
Well, we deem it organized because there is a conspiracy that is in place. So more than three or more people collectively working together to contravene or break the law. Also, too, when we deal with fentanyl production, it takes a level of sophistication and logistics of planning, funding, and contacts to actually import the precursors and establish a lab of this sophistication, of this magnitude, to be able to bring in the materials from overseas or import it, get it through those tests and balances and checks, and also to establish a footprint for the lab to be created, and the equipment necessary for these labs, they're not cheap, and so it takes a bankroll or a funding source for this to actually be implemented. Also, too, is in the distribution, the logistics of creation and then distributing it to the customer, that being the unfortunate citizens of Alberta, they have to facilitate that as well. So that in itself is exactly what normal companies would establish under legit umbrellas. It is just that factor that brings in the complexities of organized crime. They have divisions, sections, and people in charge of certain departments within that criminal network.
And where was the fentanyl that was recovered in this operation? Where was it bound for? Was it the streets of Canada? Was it heading south of the border?
Well, we certainly know that there is a demand for fentanyl in our big city hubs, and certainly in northern Alberta, southern Alberta. No community is immune, unfortunately, to the demand. We suspect that this supply was supplying that demand within our province for sure. Now, to the point of it going interprovincial to our neighbors to the west or to the east, we're not 100% sure, but certainly, as the data has proven, we don't suspect it going south of the border.
And you say, as the data has proven, are you talking writ large you don't suspect it's going, or just in this particular case?
Right. In this particular case, we don't have any evidence to suggest that it was going south of the border.
Why I'm asking this question is we're trying to get a sense, given that fentanyl is the preoccupation right now with the border and Trump and tariffs, of whether or not we're seeing Mexican cartels involved in Alberta, whether or not we're seeing production based in Alberta at the super lab level or otherwise that is aimed for the American market.
We have no indication that the cartel itself was involved in setting up these production labs within our Alberta footprint or within the nation. But not to say that there is an interest in establishing a footprint within the Canadian market. But what we have discovered, or lack of discovered, that there's no indication at this point that it's directly linked to the cartels.
Of course, you can only know what you know. And we do know, obviously, that in spite of the president saying massive amounts of fentanyl come across the northern border going into the states, that the actual seized amount is very small. But it does beg the question, is that because, they haven't detected amounts that could actually amount to what he's suggesting? Any thoughts on that?
Right. Again, the speculation is, to your point, is we don't know what we don't know. So with that does law enforcement need some assistance in kind of growing our presence and our vigilance in relation to any precursors or labs or trafficking of the fentanyl or firearms? Of course, the more hands, the more eyes, the better. That is without saying. But certainly, as we've seen over the last 5-6 years, like Alert has always been in this space, and we're always been working with our international partners, that both being more importantly south of the border in Montana, and we have a good relationship with HSI and DEA, and we meet with them on a regular basis, sharing intelligence and sharing in investigative strategies. There hasn't been a spike in the last few years in relation to this phenomenon or this declaration that a ton of fentanyl is going south of the border. So I would have suspected that should that have been the case, the American partners would have set the alarm way sooner, way earlier, years ago.